Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood of Your Legacy Legal Care, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning and welcome to Life Happens with me, Kim Hegwood, and our very special guest today is Dr. David Bernstein. Good morning.
Good morning, Kim.
So, we're going to have a really good show today because we're going to be talking about the 5 steps to a healthier, happier you. And that's good. 5 is easy. I mean, I can probably handle 5. You can start getting a little bit more, and we might not be able to, we might get worn out after that. So let's start with something simple for you. And what inspired you to develop the Power of 5 formula? And kind of how did your background in geriatrics kind of help that along?
It's really quite interesting, Kim. First, you did talk about 5 things. So when I was in my training, one of my professors said, don't leave more than 5 recommendations in a consultation because even doctors can't remember 5 things, let alone patients. And it was very difficult in practice. I'd have to write things down. But if I went beyond 5, that was too many. And so I I learned early in my career that I wanted to do writing and express myself, and it was really quite frustrating to try and hone in and give people and my patients what it took to live a healthy, long life. And longevity was part of my makeup in terms of what I was trying to establish in my patients. So I wanted to structure something that was easy, 5 things that I could give to my patients to help them navigate their health from the time we met for as long as they lived.
Perfect. So let's talk about those 5 key areas. Can you kind of walk us through and talk a little bit about and how they're essential for all those of us that want to age gracefully?
Sure. Well, I did learn early in my career also that common things were common. And so I looked at what are the most common afflictions? What are the health issues that people as they age face? And the 3 biggest were heart disease, cancer, and neurodegenerative disease, especially in elders. That would be Alzheimer's disease and all forms of dementia, and Parkinson's disease are 2 big neurodegenerative diseases. And then I endeavored to figure out what's the root cause. How are they all? What do they have in common? So if I can give them instructions, how could those instructions be really similar? And so those 3 things had one thing in common, and that was inflammation. And that's inflammation in our body. That's a chronic inflammatory process. An acute inflammatory process is getting a splinter. And when you get a splinter, your body attacks that splinter, you get pussy, and then you pull it out and you're better. But if you have a chronic inflammatory process, it creates vascular disease, which would be heart disease, cancer, and neurodegenerative disease. So the idea was, what are the things that create inflammation? What are the general things that create inflammation? And so it was what people ate, how they exercised or their activity, how they were stressed, how their sleep was, and how their sex or socialization was. And my generation learned that sex sells in magazines and so forth. I use sex, but it's really socialization. So those are 5 things. And then I wanted to make it even easier. Let's figure out if I could make them all begin with the same letter. So I chose move things around on my little board there, and I said, "Oh, well, s- sweets is what we eat. Sweat is exercise. Sleep is self-explanatory. Sweat and um, interactions and connections. I translated into socialization and sex. So we could talk about each of those if you wish. And and it starts with sweets, and sweets is carbohydrates and sugars, and they're really very hazardous to our body, and they create a lot of inflammation. So think about the fact that when someone eats something sweet or any of the other S's is involved, it creates inflammation, and that inflammation will affect blood vessels. And a inflamed blood vessel around your heart is the one that's going to have an acute plaque rupture and a heart attack. So, what can we do to reduce that inflammatory process and reduce the risk of heart disease? Because we can have all the stents and all the new technology, but unless we get it from the root cause, which would be that inflammatory process, and that's why diabetics have so much heart disease, because they're chronically inflamed. Their blood vessels are irritated, and it doesn't take much for a plaque rupture to occur and an acute occlusion or blockage of heart artery. So that was a key ingredient in that, and I'll talk about in a few minutes about what we can do about it. But the second is sweat and exercise. And the more I research exercise, and I've exercised all my life, I did eat sweets in my life, but I exercised all my life. And exercise is this unbelievable anti-inflammatory process. Not only does it reduce inflammation, which is helpful for your blood vessels, but it's been found to show a reduction in the risk of cancer and an improvement in recovery during post-cancer treatment. So, uh, exercise is incredibly important, and we find that it's also important in terms of cognitive state. So we can maintain a better cognitive state if we exercise. And it's probably the best antidepressant that's ever been invented. So, for people who would rather take a pill, they're taking a bunch of pills for their depression, but exercise is really important. In my career, I probably didn't take as good a care of myself in terms of sleep, because as a physician, it was like go, 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 go. And then in the final third of my career, I found so many people had sleep disorders, particularly sleep apnea. And when someone is sleeping and then they're awakened and then they go back to sleep and then they're awakened and go back to sleep because their airways obstructed, that causes release of adrenaline and cortisol, those inflammatory factors that create more inflammation. So there's sleep, and then there's stress. And we all know about stress and what it does to our system. And all of these also affect our immune system. So the effect on our immune system by chronic stress, the chronic stress that causes blood vessel disease, is a fourth factor. And then there's socialization. Well, socialization is incredibly important, and some of the researchers looking at longevity have indicated that that socialization is probably the linchpin and the thing that holds it all together, and probably is important or more important than any of the other factors I mentioned. And we have a loneliness epidemic in this country, which preceded COVID, and it's ongoing and probably gotten worse for lots of different reasons. And we have to figure out how we can overt that or avert that, and figure out ways of making our socialization better. And some of this is demographics. If you go back 50 or 75 years, people lived close to their families, they had Sunday dinners together, and they had this social group. And then for you and I, we went to nursery school and had friends, and elementary school and high school, and then our group of friends dwindled. We went to college, we went to law school, fewer and fewer people. And then as a doctor, who were my friends? Well, I had 18 people that came to paid me a visit and paid me during the day, but I didn't have time to socialize. So that group of friends and community really shortened and got smaller. And I find that we need to broaden that. And that's part of our health.
Yeah, so cool. And but you talked a lot, in your stuff about inflammation. And so let's kind of step back a little bit, because that was interesting to me to see that inflammation, that a lot of these different things that you have, inflammation is kind of the underlying thing. So if you have all this inflammation, uh, what are different things that may cause it, but try to limit the talk about sweets. I really like my sweets, not a lot,
Yeah,
every now and then, but what else? I mean, what are what's the big thing that causes chronic inflammation that triggers everything else?
good. So it's all those things that I mentioned. So it's specifically when it comes to sweets, that's sugar.
Mm.
It's food. It's the wrong foods. It's processed foods. I get on my soapbox a bit and talk about how the food industry and how we've been set up to eat the wrong foods. And my wife will say, if it comes in a box or a bag, it's processed, and that's got hydrogenated fats and excess sugar or sugar added. Look at an apple in your refrigerator. Nobody added anything to it. And a strawberry. Strawberries have fiber built in. So when you say, oh, that's really a sweet strawberry, it's really healthy because the fiber is going to cover it basically and slow its absorption and make it more healthy than having a strawberry smoothie made with excess sugar. So it's this process where your body recognizes those sugary sweet substances high in carbohydrates that create that release of cortisol and this inflammation in blood vessels. And so the same thing is true with exercise is an anti-inflammatory. It curtails that. It reduces cortisol, and you have an endorphin release and release of any other neurochemicals that dampen down the inflammatory effect. And we know that with stress, for example, is you have a release of adrenaline, a release of cortisol, and that's that hormone that causes inflammation. And inflammation sort of knows no bounds. It's like inflammation. I'm going to get your blood vessels. I'm going to reduce your immune system, make you more susceptible to infections, make you more susceptible to cancer. Do something in your brain that may make you more susceptible to neurologic disease. And I'm not sure I covered everything you asked about with that. So ask me more so I can give your listeners a better answer.
Well, let's talk about let's kind of run through those 5 S's. You said sweets, you said sweat, you said socialization, um, uh,
Stress,
stress, and then you said sex.
that's a socialization. Those,
Okay, part of
those,
that. Okay.
those are the same.
Okay. Well, I'm missing the fifth one. What's the fifth one?
Sweat, sweets, sleep,
Sleep. Okay.
sleep. So, 7 or 8 hours a day is what people ought to shoot for. And if they're having sleep disorders and not sleeping, or someone says they snore and they stop breathing at night, that's an indication of a trip to the doctor. And what I've discovered in this part of my life is that getting appointments with doctors is very difficult. Access to care is an expression that I've learned in the last few years, and my patients who desperately need to see sleep doctors or other specialists are being given appointments in 6 months. So it's really a shame. And primary care doctors need to pick up the baton and work with that and get those people worked up quicker. Um, I can talk a little bit about what to do about each of those. So we talked about sweets, and it seems like, well, it would be don't eat sugar, but what should one eat? And keep things simple. And if people are going to make a change, pick a starting point with one and work yourself up to all five. But it's okay. I need to do something with my eating lifestyle. I avoid the word diet, so it's a lifestyle, and I recommend a Mediterranean diet. I recommend um, plant a plant-based diet mainly, and because of my age and the difficulty of absorbing protein in a plant-based diet, I've added a little excess protein because as we age, we lose muscle mass and it's harder to build it up. And so, recommendations for protein intake by professional organizations has been a little lackluster and needed to be increased. So, the average person listening to this podcast ought to be taking in 100 grams of protein a day, which is not easy. That would be 20 grams with each meal and a couple of snacks during the day to get 20 grams, to get up to 100 grams a day, but it's doable. Protein shakes are another possibility, protein powders. So Mediterranean diet, lots of fruits, vegetables. Some people talk about the alcohol content in that. I tend to have reading most recently is that there's little redeeming quality of drinking alcohol. I think it's possibly the alcohol lobby has pushed for that to be included in meal plans, but I don't think it belongs there. There are other things that don't belong there too. You and I probably grew up in the same generation, and I ate a lot of Fruit Loops and Captain Crunch, and they're
Yes.
really loaded with sugar and shouldn't even be sold, and they're not sold in Europe. So Europe has a better way of doing this. And I want to address one other thing about 5 steps. Well, when I finished the book, what I realized is I wrote the book for myself. Like, I wanted to be healthier and live this long life. I know all these things that I observed. So this was like became my own instruction book. So I did impact myself, and I did make my dietary changes, and then I set my goal of at least 150 minutes a week and getting up to as much as 450 minutes a week of exercise. And people should start low and go slow and work themselves up, but it would be starting at 30 minutes 5 days a week of even walking. But strength training is really important. Having muscle mass is incredibly important. And Kim, in the work that you do, if you see that someone can't get out of their chair without pushing off and using their arms, and they're destined for bad things, because in order to survive and get up off the floor if you fall, you need muscle strength in your legs. We sit too much in our jobs, and we need to work on our hip stabilizers and our hip muscles so that we can get up off the floor. And we need muscle to do that, and we need exercise to keep those muscles tuned. So we got sleep, sweets, sweat, sleep 7 or 8 hours. If you're not getting that, work on it. Darken your room, lower the temperature in your bedroom. There's something from the Sleep Foundation where you can get sleep hygiene tips. Your bedroom is for sleep and sex and nothing else. It's not for reading or eating or smoking or having an argument or any of those things that will disrupt sleep. So it's really important to recognize that. Um, stress is ubiquitous. Figure out a way to overcome it. Work meditation into it. Keep a journal. Have a journal next to your bed where you can have keep track of your gratitude and what you're grateful for every day. These are things that are difficult to incorporate into one's life. And be patient. um, and then there's socialization. And I mentioned that I didn't socialize much, and now I have an opportunity to see people more frequently, and I have lunches with people, and I'm just trying to build rapport and develop relationships, because it was not something I was able to do, and probably difficult for you, Kim. And in a practice where you're working 8 hours a day and you're seeing people who have difficulties, you don't really want to go home and get into that, but it's important. And I tell the people that I meet, I'm doing this for my health, to have lunch with you, and that we build a relationship. And I'm pretty forward about it. And so, it's good for you too. And I have a group of guys I have lunch with on Thursday. We call ourselves Romeos, retired old men eating out. But
That's it.
for the people that you see in your practice, encourage them to develop hobbies, to meet with people. Maybe it's a birding group or a chess group or bridge, something where they can be with like-minded people. Maybe a photography class where they could meet people and become friends, because we've become friendless in lots of ways. And it's a health hazard. And so I've addressed 5 health hazards that people can really make a difference if they are so interested.
Perfect. No, I see a lot of that stuff that happens, when people, age. I see the isolation a lot, and so you have to stop and ask clients, what do you do for fun? You need fun. What do you do for fun? Well, I don't really do anything. Well, you need fun, so let's figure out what we can do, so and I'm not a huge fan of people living by themselves as they age and not doing just staying home all the time, because I just think that's so detriment, to being happy and being healthy, and just it just seems wrong. I'm a very much a people person, so I like hanging out with other people, so definitely, we encourage everybody that we can. But here's the kicker. So if our listeners want to talk to you about what you can do for them, so how do they get in touch with you?
Well, there's my name, David at power of the number 5life.com. and also my website, powerofthe5life.com. And I encourage people to go to my website because I write blogs. My wife posts recipes. I have a free book that people can get, or free recipes that my wife has posted as a little booklet. And I'll tell you a little secret that later this summer, I have a 6-part series coming out on the hazards and difficulties of this item, smartphones,
Oh,
and
yeah.
how they've detracted our attention and makes us distracted. It maybe affect our memory, but it also interferes with relationships. And you and I both know we can go to a restaurant and see a couple out on their date night, and both of them are looking at their phone as they sit down. And I don't think they're looking at recipes.
Yeah.
And I see it because I've written about this. I see it all too often, and I transition over into the fact that there's this impact on relationships and loneliness, and that if people are dealing with technology and looking at their screen all day, not only is it bad for their brain and bad for lots of things, but it detracts from relationships. And people get unhealthy relationships. And Kim, in the job that you do, that people get suckered into scams and lose their entire savings. And I've seen it like an accident happening in front of me and with a couple of my patients, and there was little I could do. And so um, there's a lot of dangers in what goes on computers, online, and technology that people need to address. So I spent a lot of time writing that one, and people would be find it valuable, I think. In addition to things about living a healthy, happy, longer life, and one more thing is just select one, make one change out of the 5, and when you get it down pat, do another one and add on.
Perfect. Thanks so much for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to having you on again soon.
Thanks, Kim. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.